I'm going to bring her on. She's going to explain what she learned, but she reported exclusively that they actually do have a potential suspect in the case, and the identity is rather shocking.
The room goes quiet the moment those words leave his mouth. I was there that night. A pause follows, heavy enough that even the cameras seem to stop adjusting. Then the second line lands, slower, measured, almost controlled. She was not alone. At that exact moment, the direction of the entire investigation into Nancy Guthrie changes without warning. It is the morning of February 2026 in Tucson, Arizona. Reporters are already positioned before the press conference begins. Investigators stand off to the side. Family members are not speaking publicly. The expectation in the room is simple: another update, another reminder that an 84-year-old woman is still missing from her home in the Catalina foothills. But what unfolds is not routine. It is a break in silence from Tommaso Cheon, Nancy Guthrie's son-in-law, who had remained publicly quiet since the disappearance. No interviews. No statements. No appeals. Nothing that suggested involvement in shaping the public narrative. Until now.
That is all it took. 3 words spoken into a microphone in front of a room full of reporters, cameras, and investigators who had been waiting weeks for exactly this moment.
Nancy Guthrie, 84 years old, had been reported missing on the morning of February 1, 2026. She lived alone in a long-established home in Tucson, a place known for its quiet structure, predictable routines, and long-standing familiarity with neighbors in the area. She was not a person who moved unpredictably. She was not someone who vanished without a trace of intent. And yet, that is exactly what investigators were facing. The first confirmed reports placed the last known hours of Nancy's life inside her residence on the night of January 31st. A home that showed no forced entry. No clear sign of disturbance at the point of access. No immediate indication of how or why she was no longer there the next morning. That detail alone redirected the investigation from the outside in. Because when there is no forced entry, the focus narrows. Not outward. Inward. Toward the people who already had access. Toward those who understood the layout. Toward those familiar with routines, systems, and timing inside that home. Among them was Tommaso Cheon. In the weeks leading up to this press conference, he had remained in the background of public attention. While other family members appeared before cameras, he stayed out of view. That absence did not go unnoticed by those following the case closely. Then came the moment that shifted everything. His admission was not framed with hesitation. It was delivered directly, with deliberate pacing, as though each word had been weighed before reaching the microphone. I was there that night. The statement alone changed the structure of the timeline investigators had been working with. But it was the second sentence that widened the scope. She was not alone. That line introduced something that had not been officially confirmed in public reporting until that moment. The suggestion of another presence inside the home on the night Nancy Guthrie disappeared. Not identified. Not explained. Not accounted for in any public statement released by law enforcement. The reaction in the room was immediate but controlled. Pens stopped moving. Cameras remained fixed. The silence that followed was not confusion alone. It was calculation. Because every investigator present understood what that statement implied for a case already built around a narrow and fragile timeline. Nancy Guthrie's last confirmed hours were already under scrutiny. Doorbell camera systems had gone offline in the early morning hours. Motion alerts had been triggered inside the home without preserved footage. Her mobile connection to monitoring systems had ended shortly after. And by sunrise, she was gone. No belongings removed. No note. No visible indication of departure. Only absence. At this point in the investigation, the focus had already shifted toward digital and physical records that could not be influenced by memory or interpretation. Systems that log activity without emotion. Devices that do not forget. Among them, a cardiac monitoring device linked to Nancy's pacemaker, which continued recording physiological data independently of external networks. That detail had not been publicly expanded upon in official statements, but it formed part of the investigative framework being reviewed behind closed doors. Because if accurate, it would mean one thing: parts of Nancy's final hours were recorded inside her own body, second by second, without interruption. And that record would not depend on witness testimony. It would depend only on access. But even as technical questions built inside the investigation, the human element in the room could not be ignored. A son-in-law standing at a podium. A missing woman at the center of a growing federal case. A second presence implied, but not identified. And a timeline that now contained more uncertainty than before the statement was ever made. HI viewers, have you ever followed a case where a single sentence completely changed what you believed was possible about what happened? That question now hangs over this investigation in a way that cannot be ignored. Because before this moment, the case of Nancy Guthrie was defined by absence. A missing person. A locked home. A narrow window of time that investigators were still trying to reconstruct. After this moment, it becomes something else entirely. Not just a disappearance, but a question of who was inside that house when time stopped recording clearly.
The source that I have is impeccable, and he said that not only were the cameras smashed, plural cameras smashed, so that the suspect likely knew about the locations of them, but that the car belonging to the sister of Savannah Guthrie, Annie Guthrie, was towed, impounded, and taken into evidence.
The press conference continues for only a short while after his statement. No names are added. No further clarification is given regarding the second person he referenced. Law enforcement does not confirm details in real time. Instead, the focus shifts to controlled statements, careful wording, and procedural restraint. But outside that room, the reaction begins immediately. Because in cases like this, silence does not reduce attention. It increases it. Every detail already known about the night of January 31st begins to take on new weight. The timing of digital disconnections. The sequence of alerts. The absence of forced entry. The behavior of systems designed to record presence, not guess it. And now, the added presence of someone who claims to have been inside the home during that exact window. That combination creates a narrowing effect on the investigation. Not outward. Inward. Toward a single structure. A single location. A single set of hours that investigators continue to revisit. And within that structure, one question begins to dominate all others. If Tommaso Cheon was there, and if another person was there as he stated, then what exactly occurred between the moment systems were still active and the moment Nancy Guthrie was no longer accounted for? That question does not receive an answer in this moment. It receives something far more important to an investigation still unfolding. It receives attention. And in cases like this, attention is often the beginning of pressure. Pressure on timelines. Pressure on statements. Pressure on evidence that has not yet been fully released to the public. Because somewhere inside that window of time, between recorded motion and total silence, something changed the direction of this case permanently. And what investigators are now working with is no longer just a missing person report. It is a sequence that no longer fits cleanly together. And as this press conference ends, one final detail remains unresolved. The second person. Not named. Not identified. Not confirmed. Only mentioned once. And then left behind in silence that now carries more weight than the statement itself. The investigation does not end here. It expands. And what comes next will depend on what investigators can confirm, and what still remains locked inside that narrow window of time. If you are following this case closely, consider subscribing and turning on notifications, because the next development may change the direction of everything again. And before you leave this chapter, leave your thoughts in the comments. Not theories as conclusions, but one simple reflection. What stood out to you more in this statement? What was said, or what was left out?
And this is the wording. It's very important. The wording is very important. He said they now believe the son-in-law may be the prime suspect. Those are the words. Son-in-law may be the prime suspect at this point.
The recording does not begin with silence. It begins with interruption. A frame of motion that should have been preserved but is not. A brief signal captured at 1:47 a.m. when the exterior camera at Nancy Guthrie's home in Tucson suddenly stops storing footage. No warning. No visible fault reported in advance. Just a clean break in continuity. Inside the house, systems continue to register activity. At 2:12 a.m., motion is detected. The system logs it. The alert is recorded. But the corresponding footage does not remain available for review. That gap becomes one of the first fixed points investigators return to repeatedly. Because systems designed to record do not typically forget selectively. At 2:28 a.m., another break occurs. Nancy Guthrie's mobile connection to her monitoring system disconnects. No reconnect ion follows. From that point forward, her digital presence is no longer traceable through routine channels. No outgoing communication. No confirmed movement through personal devices. No verified contact. Only absence across multiple systems at once. Nancy Guthrie, 84 years old, is still inside her home during this window. That detail is not disputed in the early findings of the investigation. What is unclear is what happens between the last confirmed internal activity and the point where those systems go silent. The home itself does not show forced entry. Doors remain secured. Windows show no signs of external breach. The structure, in its physical condition, does not present an obvious point of intrusion from the outside. That detail redirects attention immediately. Because when external entry is not supported by evidence, the focus shifts inward. To timing. To access. To those already connected to the environment. The residence is not isolated in ownership or familiarity. Family connections extend into its immediate surroundings. Regular presence from close relations is not unusual in the broader context of the household structure. Among those connected to the property is Tommaso Cheon, son-in-law of Nancy Guthrie. His presence in the broader timeline becomes central after his later statement confirms he was inside the home during the night in question. But at this stage of the investigation, that admission has not yet been made publicly. Investigators are working only with the timeline as recorded through systems and early witness accounts. A home that records partial activity. A sequence of disconnected digital signals. A missing block of time between motion detection and system failure. And a person who has not yet fully accounted for their position within that window. The question forming inside the investigation is not immediate speculation. It is structural. What occurred between the moment motion was detected and the moment communication systems went offline? And more importantly, who was present during that interval? Because in cases involving controlled environments, absence of forced entry does not reduce complexity. It increases it. It narrows the possible range of explanations to those already inside the system's perimeter. By the following morning, Nancy Guthrie is reported missing. Her personal items remain in place. Her medication has not been taken. Her phone remains inside the residence. Nothing suggests planned departure. Nothing suggests routine interruption. Only discontinuity. HI viewers, if a timeline shows everything except the exact moment something changes, what do you believe matters more in a case like this, the moments that are recorded, or the ones that disappear? That question becomes central to how this case develops in public attention. Because at this stage, investigators are not dealing with a single missing moment. They are dealing with overlapping systems that stopped recording at different points in time. Each system ending its record slightly differently. Each leaving behind a fragment rather than a full account. Doorbell system failure at 1:47 a.m. Motion detection at 2:12 a.m. Digital disconnection at 2:28 a.m. 3 separate points. 3 separate breaks. But no confirmed explanation that connects them into a single, verified sequence. As investigators review the structure of the home, attention also begins to shift toward access. Not forced access. Authorized access. The kind that does not require entry points to be breached because it already exists within the system. Security systems in residential environments often rely on credential-based control. That means access is not always about physical intrusion. It can be about authorization levels, stored permissions, or knowledge of system operation. In this case, reports indicate that parts of the home's system were later accessed using valid credentials. That detail, while not publicly expanded in full investigative disclosure, becomes significant in how the timeline is interpreted internally. Because valid access changes the meaning of absence. It removes randomness. It introduces familiarity. By the time daylight arrives on February 1, 2026, the situation is no longer interpreted as a simple missing person alert. It is treated as a structured investigation involving controlled access points and broken data continuity. And within that structure, one fact remains unchanged. Nancy Guthrie is not located. As investigators begin reconstructing the night hour by hour, they are working with incomplete data streams. Not because nothing was recorded, but because what was recorded does not align cleanly across systems. The camera stops at one point. The motion system registers another. The digital connection ends later. And none of those systems provide a unified explanation when placed together. That inconsistency becomes the central pressure point of the case. Because when systems disagree, investigators must determine whether the issue is technical failure or intentional disruption. And at this stage, no conclusion is confirmed. Only questions remain. What happened inside the house during the final active window of recorded time? Who had the ability to move through systems without triggering external breach indicators? And why do the recorded points of activity stop just before Nancy Guthrie is no longer accounted for? The answers to those questions are not yet visible in the public record. But they are now the foundation of the investigation moving forward. And what comes next is not about what was lost. It is about who begins to speak when silence is no longer enough to explain the gaps in the timeline. The investigation continues. But the timeline is no longer stable. And in the next chapter, a single voice steps forward and changes the direction of everything that follows. If you are following this case closely, subscribe and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next update in this unfolding investigation. And before the next chapter begins, leave your thoughts in the comments. Not conclusions, just your first reaction to this question. When a timeline breaks into separate pieces like this, what do you think matters more, what is recorded, or what is missing?